Hello everyone, my name is Belko and today I wanted to do another quick start guide for the rogue in Baldur's Gate 3. So whether you're looking to start a fresh campaign as a rogue or you're looking to bring Astarion into your party to fill that role for you, this is the video for you. So as always, I'm just going to go over the first few levels to give you sort of the overview of how the class works so you can make decisions for yourself on how you want to build out your rogue character, because Baldur's Gate 3 does sort of hide the way some of the mechanics work, and the rogue is no exception to this, and there's a lot of changes from the tabletop version of the game. So if you're coming from 5th edition to Baldur's Gate 3, there's a lot of things for the rogue that have changed, and some of the things have stayed the same but are still kind of hidden in the UI a little bit. And I definitely noticed a few changes that felt a little weird, but some that felt really, really cool. So we'll talk about the rogue in depth in this video. First up, let's talk about the roles a rogue is going to fulfill in your party. So outside of combat, they make fantastic scouts, and because they have access to expertise at level 1, they make fantastic party faces as well. And they have quite a few other skills that they can take, but generally speaking, really looking at that ability to deal with traps, and if you would like, potentially deal with social encounters as well. Inside of combat, rogues make fantastic strikers, meaning they are the character that's going to deal a lot of single target damage, and unlike some other classes, they aren't really relying on limited resources to do this. And depending on the subclass you take, you can do a ton of damage on a rogue, and depending on your build, and they function both as melee or ranged characters, and whether they're melee or ranged, they still are going to have fantastic mobility because of some of the features they unlock in the first few levels. And on top of that, because rogues unlock so many unique features within the first 3 levels, rogues are one of the best classes for multiclassing, and a lot of cool multi-class builds will take 2 to 3 levels of rogue because they get some really powerful and unique rogue features. And unfortunately, rogues don't necessarily gain a ton by going really deep into rogue levels. But if you want to stay as a single class for your playthrough of the game, then I absolutely recommend doing that, because they are totally fine. You don't have to worry, but if you do want to make some really powerful multi-class builds, we will talk about that towards the end of the video. So let's talk about sneak attack. In Baldur's Gate 3, sneak attack takes an action, and it's using a finesse weapon when you make an attack with advantage, or if you have an ally within 1.5 meters and you don't have disadvantage on the target. This is going to come up in a few situations. So for example, if you are in melee range and you have an ally next to your enemy, but you're trying to shoot them with a crossbow, you would have disadvantage on that attack because you're using a ranged weapon in melee combat. So you can't use a ranged sneak attack in melee, for example. However, you would be able to use your melee sneak attack. So rogues do have the option to either sneak attack melee or ranged, but unlike in 5th edition, sneak attack lets you use it once per round, so it doesn't matter if you're hitting them with your action or a offhand attack. So in 5th edition, when you make a weapon attack, you can use your bonus action to make an offhand attack if both weapons are light, and that means that if you miss with your first attack, but you hit with your second, because you haven't used your sneak attack for the round yet, you could still apply your sneak attack damage, which is why dual wielding short swords is totally fine for a rogue, and it actually lets them land that sneak attack more consistently. In Baldur's Gate 3, you only get that one a chance per round. So sneak attack is still good, and it is really powerful, and at low levels you will one-shot things with this ability, but it is a little different than the tabletop version. And next, we're going to talk about ability scores and proficiencies. So let's talk about these skills that you get access to, and then we'll go back and talk about maybe which things you want to consider in terms of ability scores. So you get, obviously, all the dexterity-based skill proficiencies available. So things like the acrobatics, the sleight of hands, and the stealth. And so I've picked up all of those right away. I like athletics because it lets you shove and resist being shoved, and depending on which rogue build you take, you do have access to so many different bonus actions. And because shoving is a bonus action, this can be a really useful way to make use of it. And there's an argument to be made for having a little bit more strength on your rogue than you otherwise might think. I also just like having investigation a little bit, and I put one of my expertise points into perception, and you'll notice I have a +6 in perception because I am investing in wisdom on this particular character, specifically because for my scout, I want my character to be able to find the traps and the secrets, and as they're scouting ahead, that's something that they can do. And then obviously things like sleight of hand and stealth, they're going to be pretty good at without expertise. But even then, I'm putting the expertise in sleight of hand because I want to disarm traps, I want to pick pockets, I want to pick locks, and that's what I'm going to be doing with my rogue. So that's that breakdown there. In terms of your actual ability scores, you do have quite a bit of freedom. So dexterity is really your primary attribute as a rogue. It gives you that attack and damage bonus with your finesse weapons. So that's going to be your rapiers, your short swords, your daggers, etc. And it's also going to be for your crossbows, which are going to be generally what you want to be using because sort of the best bang for buck. But you can also use short bows, and there are some pretty nice short bows in the game. And if you're a high elf, you also get access to long bows, so Historian has a bit of a bonus there. So you actually can get some pretty nice bows for your rogue if you're building this way, and this gives you some options to be a very powerful ranged striker. Otherwise, the ability scores can really depend on what you want to be doing with your character in the long term in terms of a multi-class or thinking about skills. So obviously I'm putting a little bit more into wisdom here because like I said, I want to be a scout, but you can absolutely consider dropping things like intelligence and charisma because for me, this is not my Tav. Astarion will not be having too many conversations, so I don't really need him to have any charisma. Obviously, rogues make fantastic party faces, and you could considering flipping this around and putting your charisma much higher. That's totally fine. I might consider putting a little bit more into strength just for those extra jump distance and that extra shoving. I think that's really, really fun in Baldur's Gate 3, and it's something that's different from the tabletop. So having a bit more strength is fine. And then obviously I'm playing on Tactician. I think that's a really fun way to play the game, but you don't have to. So I like having Constitution be pretty high. I like my characters to survive, taking a lot of damage, and my dexterity is obviously at that 16 as well. I've also had people say they like to put their dexterity something up to like 17, and this would be totally fine as well. This gives you access to potentially taking a half feat at 4th level, which is a very viable option. It also allows you to take an item that's available relatively early on in the game. There's an opportunity to increase your stat points a little bit with some of the story items. I don't want to get into too many details, but this is totally a viable strategy as well. So we'll leave it like this for now, and we will go on to level 2. So rogues get a ton of cool abilities right at level 2. Specifically, we're talking about using your bonus action in some great ways. So you have cunning action for both hide and cunning action dash and cunning action disengage. This is going to let you use your bonus action to either easily get out of melee combat or really just reposition around the battlefield without provoking opportunity attacks. So getting into that position where you can get your sneak attack, or just getting away from enemies so you can make your ranged sneak attack. Dash gets you doubles your movement for your bonus action, so this is going to let you really get into position. It gives you an incredible amount of mobility, so you can kite enemies almost infinitely, and there's a lot of power in that. And then cunning action hide, this is also an ability that you can feel free to abuse. There are plenty of encounters where a single rogue will completely decimate the entire encounter by just sneaking ahead, hiding in the shadows, and like using their action to take a shot, hiding in the shadows again, rinse and repeat, and the enemies just cannot find you. But I typically don't like to play that cheesily, but with 2 levels in rogue, you can cheese so much, and it is really fun sometimes to do, just kind of as a challenge to see how far you can get. And rogue, because of these cunning actions, can absolutely do some incredible things that no other class can do this easily, which is why a level 2 dip in rogue is often a very popular dip, because getting access to these is amazing. And we're going to go on to level 3 and talk about some even more really cool abilities that you get, because rogue has a ton. Okay. So, level 3, you have a few different subclasses available. We're going to talk about the Arcane Trickster first because it has the most to talk about. With the Arcane Trickster, you automatically get the Mage Hand cantrip, and it is a little bit more special as a rogue because it's invisible. But I don't find it to be too useful. It's kind of cool, and there's some neat things you can do with Mage Hand in Baldur's Gate 3, and it is nice. You also gain a few other cantrips. I've talked about these in some of my other videos. Astarion already has the Flame Bolt from being a high elf. Getting Blade Ward could be really nice. Obviously, Friends is fantastic if you are the party face. And then situationally, you have so many different options. Shocking Grasp is fine. That you have advantage if creatures are wearing metal armor, and then the target can't use reactions. There's situations where you absolutely can use this, and there's some really fun things later on. If there's enemies that have counterspell, for example, you can have your rogue Shocking Grasp them, and then you have your caster throw off a really big, impactful spell, and they're not going to get counterspelled. You can do some things like that. Ray of Frost can be fun for creating some frozen surfaces and things like that. Obviously, Minor Illusion for distracting. You create a little illusion. So if you're going to be sneaking ahead and you want to position enemies around, you can do things with Minor Illusion. Bone Chill is fantastic, giving disadvantage on attack rolls to undead. This is really, really powerful. There's some scary undead enemies in the game, and this almost makes them trivial. So it is really, really useful. I had a comment in one of my other videos about like, yeah, Bone Chill, don't forget, it's really good. And I agree, it is good. There's just so many things to talk about. Acid Splash, I find, is not as amazing. It is an area, which like it's a bubble. And then Poison Spray is a lot of damage, but it's a con save, so I don't love this. And this is a nice range, but I find the damage isn't great. And honestly, you're probably not going to be considering too many attacking cantrips because as a rogue, your actual attacks are going to be doing so much more. Because by third level, you have 2d6 for your sneak attack plus a d6 for your short sword or whatever you're using. So would you rather be doing like a d8 plus 2d6 or 3d6 worth of damage or 1d6 worth of damage? It definitely seems like you are more it's more beneficial to take some of these. Now, Blade Ward is probably not necessary for a rogue. You have other ways to reduce your incoming damage, but especially if you're scouting, you can like turn this on and then engage. I just take it as something to have, but there's other options. There's lighting options as well if you need it. True Strike is a trap. Don't take it. It's not very good. It requires concentration. The only argument you can make is as a rogue, specifically if you are trying to attack outside of combat as much as possible, you can just turn this on and then you're guaranteeing that sneak attack. But a lot of times if you're attacking an unaware target, you already have advantage anyways, so you don't really need it. Yeah, maybe this like True Strike might have the situation if you're trying to ambush somebody who's aware of you who's not hostile because you want to be evil, I guess. But yeah, cantrips are fine. Let's go on to spells. So spells, you'll notice here, as a arcane trickster, you're sort of locked in to enchantment spells and illusion spells. So most of these are enchantment, and then you have like the one illusion spell. Disguise Self could be kind of fun. There's some fun RP things you can do with it. But some of these other ones are pretty good. Obviously, early game Sleep is super powerful, but we're already level 3 to become an arcane trickster, so it loses its effectiveness slightly. But I still find there are situations at all levels of the game where you have one or two enemies that have low hit points, and sometimes just being able to guarantee take them out of the fight for the 2 rounds is fine. And the AI loves waking up sleeping enemies. So you can use this to your advantage by putting distant enemies asleep, and some of those other enemies are going to waste their turn waking them up, and it almost takes like multiple enemies out of the game. However, as you get later and later, you're going to have ways of dealing, 15-20 damage per attack, and you have your fighters and rangers and paladins dealing multiple attacks with an action. So this becomes a little bit less valuable because 24 hit points with the first level spell slot ends up being not very much later on. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, however, is really good. It is a wisdom saving throw, and it just puts the target out of commission. And especially as an arcane trickster, you don't have too much you need to be concentrating on. So having something like this where you can just put a target out of commission and deal with another target on a subsequent turn is kind of nice. Blinding enemies is okay. It's kind of similar to the sleep in terms of the hit points, the way it works. And I find that color spray typically, as you go through the game, doesn't work as well. If you want to charm, I find friends works a little bit better. So for me, I might take something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and I might take sleep because I don't necessarily want to be using Disguise Person, and I think this is fine. There's going to be a situation where sleep is still useful at certain points in the game, just to like take out a couple low health or weaker enemies, just guaranteed. And Tasha's Hideous Laughter has uses as well, especially once you take that enemy and knock them prone. Then you can follow up later by giving yourself advantage, and you can kind of, wombo combo that way. And same with sleep. Once you put an enemy to sleep, you're guaranteed that you have advantage on them with a melee attack, and you also are guaranteed to crit them with a melee attack, which becomes very, very powerful. Okay. So in terms of your expanded spell list, here is where things get really interesting. So you have so many options. So this is where it's actually pretty difficult in terms of making a choice. Obviously, a few are not going to be necessary. So things like Expeditious Retreat, you already can do this as a bonus action, so you don't really need that. You could have taken all the Disguise Self and Color Spray and Charm, etc. already. You might consider something like Find Familiar. This would let you set up sort of additional targets for sneak attack. So you just have an additional ally that you can control and summon before combat, and then they can help you trigger your sneak attack, and that can be useful. A lot of times they're just going to die in a single hit though, but it is useful at all stages just to draw the ire of your enemies. And oftentimes they do have really fantastic movements. So you can kind of just keep them in the back and like bring them as you need. And that's fine. Fog Cloud is great for obscuring areas, gives you something to hide in. Grease is fantastic. It really slows creatures down, makes them fall prone, which opens up advantage on melee attacks for sneak attacks on subsequent turns. That can be great. I also really like Shield. You can use your reaction to gain a ton of armor, and sometimes having that on your rogue could be really, really useful. I think Thunderwave is super fun as well. It has a really nice AoE, and I find in combat situations, there's often that cluster, and you can position it sort of pixel perfect in Baldur's Gate 3, and really get it into a position where you're hitting, 2-3 enemies quite easily without hitting any of your party members, and you can get them off your friends. It does okay AoE damage. It's a very minor amount of blasting in the early game. You're not going to get too many spell slots as an arcane trickster, so you're not going to really be doing a ton of spell damage with this, but it is useful. I also have a real soft spot for Magic Missile, specifically because you see the enemy hit points, and there's been way more than one time where enemies had 2 hit points left or 3 hit points left, or a few really low health enemies. And just being able to send a couple missiles and take them out of the fight feels really, really good. So I like Magic Missile as an arcane trickster. It is, that guaranteed finishing off enemies. That's really fun. So I might probably in my top choices would be something like Fog Cloud, Grease, Shield, or Magic Missile, depending on kind of what your party needs. And I find, because I already have a little bit of crowd control here, maybe I'm going to go for something like Magic Missile. And that would be what I would do for the Arcane Trickster. Now, let's talk about some of the other things. So as we already talked about, the Invisible Mage Hand that has additional things, and you get the free Mage Hand, and you get the spell slots. Now, Thief. Thief is crazy in Baldur's Gate 3, and it's because they have such a simple and ridiculous feature, and it is Fast Hands. You gain an additional bonus action. So many classes love bonus actions. There are so many cool things you can do with bonus actions. There's some really cool spells that take bonus actions. Having more bonus actions is awesome. If you're dual wielding, you can make offhand attacks with your with your bonus action. So this, as a rogue at level 3, you can now be making 3 attacks. And with certain magical weapons, even though you don't get to add your dexterity modifier to the damage of offhand attacks, you still can be doing some serious damage with those offhand attacks, and you might consider putting that magical weapon in your offhand because you're really trying to land that effect on it, and you're not necessarily worried about adding the raw damage because you're already going to hit that with your main hand anyways, and now you're getting that bonus fire damage or psychic damage or whatever it is multiple times with your offhand. So this is really, really powerful. It's really, really good. You can use your cunning action in conjunction with this. So you can make a main hand sneak attack. You can use an offhand sneak attack, and then you can use a disengage and then just book it, or you can disengage, dash, and just like go to infinity and beyond. So super, super fun, super powerful. There are so many crazy combinations with other classes even that want to be using bonus actions. So like, bards and monks have all sorts of fun things they can be doing on bonus actions. Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with this. I'm excited about it. I'm not going to say anymore. Second story work is less exciting. There are less exciting things to say about this. You just don't take as much damage when you fall down, which is pretty rare. It does let you jump from fairly high heights, and that can have value. There are some areas in the game where, if you don't have feather fall and you don't want to take it, you can just take like 1 or 2 points of damage and just jump down there, but you will fall prone. Otherwise, you might get knocked off buildings, especially if you are using your cunning action dashes to get like way back in the enemy lines and like climb up on things to take out archers and stuff like that. You might fall a few times, but this isn't the make or break. It's not why you're becoming a thief. It's definitely getting that additional bonus action, which is fantastic. In terms of the assassin also gets some fantastic features that cannot be understated. So the assassin initiative, so assassinate. So in combat, you get advantage on attack rolls on enemies that haven't taken a turn yet. So you want to act, the very start of your initiative, but you're a dex-based character. You have great initiative, so that is what you want. Additionally, any successful attack roll against a surprise creature is a critical hit. So this kind of combines into, not only are you going to have a critical hit, you're going to have advantage on that attack roll, and it's going to do a ton of damage. And additionally, because you get advantage always as when you're attacking surprise creatures, your sneak attack that is having a really good time here with your range sneak attack typically, all those dice are going to be doubled. So this is where you get hilariously huge damage dice. And if you want to have extra fun, you can make your Tav a half orc rogue and double roll your dice for your crossbow as well. And then you're going to be doing, at level 3, something like 2d8 plus 4d6 damage on that opening attack. And those are the kind of numbers that instantly end the encounter with your surprise attack, right? So very, very fun. And because this is like to add insult to injury, because the intention of the assassin is you are generally going to be the one opening up the combat with that like omega ranged sneak attack that just kills something. As soon as it comes to your turn in initiative, typically when you do that, when you open up a combat in Baldur's Gate 3 with an action, on the first surprise round, your action is already spent. But assassins get their action and their bonus action immediately restored so that they can do it again. So they can almost immediately kill 2 enemies right at the start of the fight. Super powerful, super fun feature. And obviously, because you get all these incredibly powerful features right at level 3, rogues are so great for multiclassing. We're actually going to talk about that right now. So as I mentioned, rogues are great for multiclassing because you get so many of those powerful options right away. So if you're thinking about being an assassin, for example, a great multiclass for a rogue is something like a paladin. So specifically getting, and I would arguably start Paladin and then take the Rogue a little bit later, potentially respec, because whenever you're taking a martial class as part of a build, it's usually recommended to sort of rush until level 5, because that way you get access to the double attack feature. So 2 attacks for the action, which is really powerful. But because if you wanted to be a thief or something that has all those bonus actions, you pseudo are getting multiple attacks anyways. There's potentially some exceptions, but still, I did want to just say that before I talk about some of these other builds, because a lot of the combinations I like are involve like fighter, paladin, ranger, for example. You might want to consider going those classes to 5 and then getting your few levels of rogue. So depends on kind of what you're doing, and specifically with those classes as well, would give you access to those additional weapon and armor proficiencies, and that might change how you do things a little bit, but probably not too much. You're still likely, if you're going paladin and you want to be an assassin, you're likely going to be using a rapier and a shield potentially. And really, what you're focusing on is that initial strike with your crossbow potentially to open it up, but then you're getting into melee. And in that first round of combat, if you can sneak attack with your rapier and get a smite as well, those are big dice. So it's getting that guaranteed critical, taking advantage of the Paladin's Divine Smite feature, along with the Assassin's guaranteed critical in the first round of combat. That combination is absolutely devastating. And if you in addition, if you wanted to be a half orc to get that savage bonus where you're getting an additional weapon dice, that is a really, really powerful build that is, focusing on sort of the one shot eliminating enemies on the first turn of combat. That could be really powerful and kind of fun. Fighters also are a good combo with that, because you can have you can take a battle master fighter, and there's ways to sort of give yourself advantage with feinting attack with your maneuvers. But then you should be noting you can't, because sneak attack takes its own action. There's some anti synergy there, but being a champion is kind of cool because you have a higher crit rating. You crit on 19s, so your sneak attacks are critting twice as often, and that's definitely worth something. And then for the ranger, and it should be noted, both paladins, fighters, and rangers are also going to give you that additional specialization. So you can take on a ranger or fighter like 2-weapon fighting, or you could take the archery style to get additional accuracy, things like that. And the ranger can also give you access to a few more spell slots, which if you are an arcane trickster, that can be kind of nice, just like expands the spell casting a little bit. But ranger also gives you access to things like hunter's mark. So if you're a thief and you have all these bonus actions, you can use one of your bonus actions to apply hunter's mark, and then use your other bonus action to make a offhand attack against the target that has hunter's mark on it, and your main hand attack, sneak attack, that has hunter's mark against it. And now you're doing a lot of damage. So the ranger thief combo is pretty cool, specifically for things like hunter's mark. And if you are going for the beast tamer, you get this additional target. We've already talked about how that's really useful for a rogue, to have that companion to be an additional ally that can grant you opportunities to use your sneak attack. So that can be really, really fun as well. And then rangers also just have a nice little spell list that sort of complements the rogue. And some of your favorite terrain things can be kind of neat as well. So I definitely like the paladin, ranger, or fighter multi-class combo with a rogue. Specifically, 5 levels in any of them would give you that second melee attack. So when you use your action, you can get a second attack, and that's really, really nice. Additionally, you could consider maybe taking a few levels of wizard. Obviously, if you're going arcane trickster, they are an intelligence-based caster, so you'd want more intelligence. You'll notice all the spells I recommend taking, though, didn't really care about intelligence. So there are opportunities to make a build that's an arcane trickster that doesn't really care about intelligence and just takes things like shield or magic missile or sleep. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, however, does care about saving throws, so you're going to want more intelligence, and you would definitely bump that up. And as with a few levels of Wizard, you could be sort of a, Arcane Trickster to 3, and then the rest of your levels into Wizard, and you're going to be more like a Wizard that can also just like sneak attack once they're out of spells, and periodically as they're concentrating on other things. It's not the most powerful build, but it is a really fun build to sort of be this like sneaky spellcaster. You can also, if you're really committed to being the Arcane Trickster, at 9 levels of Arcane Trickster, when you're hidden and you cast a spell on an enemy that is unaware of you, they have disadvantage on the saving throw, which is actually an incredibly powerful effect. So if you wanted to go really deep into Rogue to level 9 Arcane Trickster, and then the rest of the way into Wizard, so the last 3 levels as Wizard, that would actually give you access to 3rd level spells, which you could do things like Hypnotic Pattern at that point. And if you're opening a fight with a well-placed Hypnotic Pattern and everybody has disadvantage on their saving throw, that's a pretty good way to start things off. So there are some powerful combinations, but obviously that's like an end game build. And if we're talking about powerful things a 12th level caster can do, they could probably do something a little bit better than that. But it is something that you can do as a rogue. So I did want to mention it. And yeah, obviously the bonus actions we've talked about combine well with a class like Monk. Potentially it's going to take advantage of bonus actions, or even Barbarians. Barbarians can make a lot of use. You use one of your bonus actions to fly into a rage, and if you're a Frenzied Berserker, you can then use that bonus action to make an extra attack right away, and then having Cunning Action to move around the battlefield to get into range to make all those attacks can be great. You would probably even consider going for more of like a strength build with this though, and maybe just foregoing just kind of ignoring that you have sneak attack sometimes, and like maybe once in a while you'll pull it out with a ranged weapon. But generally speaking, just getting access to all those bonus actions can be really cool. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there. I've talked quite a bit of all the fun things you can do. There's obviously so many more. Any class that wants to take advantage of having lots of bonus actions will love multi-classing with the Rogue. And in general, the Rogue is a really fun, very iconic class from Dungeons and Dragons. And thanks again for watching. I appreciate all the comments and responses and the thumbs up to the videos, and I will catch you in the next one.